So I was literally born when Uganda was in turmoil. So parts of my childhood, what I remember is really enjoying the small things, the very basic things, because we could hardly access something like sugar. So we used to eat potatoes. I don't know if any of the people who are in my age bracket would tell you what the experience was, but that was our experience.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from all around the world. Welcome to another episode of the Big Local Podcast, because we are Black, global, and we are local. And today we're going to continue with a conversation that I started a few episodes back about Africans working in other African countries. As I said, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of content about Africans working in Europe, in the Middle East, in the US, and all other places. But recently I was reading a bit about Vision, actually Agenda 2063, the Africa that we want, and they actually have something to do with migration, labor, and employment. But I thought to myself, okay, so there's, this is one of the things that we as Africans want, but have we had stories? Have we had stories about Africans working in other African countries? So today we're very fortunate to have a lady who will be joining us, and she's really the definition of global and local. So Connie, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for honoring our invite.
Thank you so much, Murundi. It's lovely to be on the podcast today.
Yes, so without further ado, please tell us a bit about yourself, where you were born, what you enjoyed as a child, where you're currently living, how long you've been there, and what are you doing there?
All right. So as Murundi said, my name is Connie Nawaigo, and hyphenated Juarara, because I'm married to a Zimbabwean now. Okay. I was born and raised in Kampala, though my dad is from Kamuli and my mom Uganda. But of course, my dad grew up in Bugembe and my mom in a small little village, Namungare. And they decided to raise us in Kampala. Because my dad was Mwiri, then Budo, then moved to Cambridge, studied there, decided for his own reasons to come back, though his family stayed in the UK, to come back to Uganda. And he raised us there. So I was born right at the end when Idi Amin was leaving. So I was literally born when Uganda was in turmoil. So parts of my childhood, what I remember is really enjoying the small things, the very basic things, because we could hardly access something like sugar. So we used to eat potatoes. I don't know if any of the people who are in my age bracket would tell you what the experience was, but that was our experience. So actually, for me, this question brings a lot of nostalgia, because I share with my children who are pretty still young and focused on iPads and TV. That for us, we spent a lot of time climbing trees, building our own cars, building our own houses, which I think also helped with a lot of innovation, a lot of creativity, and releasing a lot of pent-up energy. So that's who I am. My parents, my dad was an engineer, and he was a telephone engineer. They call him a telephone engineer. He was an electrical engineer, then he specialized in telephones. So he worked for the East African Post Office. Then when it was disbanded, he was moved to the planning unit in the Uganda Post Office. And my mom was a secretary who grew up in the government structures, rose to the government structures to become the personal secretary to the president. And that was Idi Amin, though she did work under other presidents. So she was the personal secretary to Idi Amin. So yes, there's a lot of murky history there, but that's the life we grew up in, which sometimes oscillated then from within the ambit of privilege. But then when all of that got lost, we really had to navigate a very difficult transition from being there to then dropping. We were raised in Bugolobi,
the flat?
Bandari Rice. No, Bandari Rice.
Okay,
Bandari Rice. Yeah, not the flats. The
Bandari
Bandari Rice. There's the other flats, but the opposite. The houses. Actually, I think one is our neighbor's house turned into like a UEB office. And of course, ours was sold, and it's some office. It's painful whenever I pass drive there, and I'm like, where are homes? And now they're offices.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I was raised. But I love gardening because my mom was an ardent gardener. So I loved, she always grew her own potatoes, always grew her own tomatoes, onions, the vegetables.
Yeah.
So I loved doing that. I would grow my own sunflowers, of course, which I wouldn't turn into any oil, but I loved the fact that there would be flowers and then I would get seeds. Yeah, that was what I loved. So as a child, I engaged a lot in gardening and of course challenging my brothers. If I saw them climbing trees, I'd say a girl can do that too. So I'd climb and my mom would be up shouting that girls don't do that. I'm like,
girls
why?
Don't climb trees.
Then another exciting thing that I used to do with my brother, because we used to pass, because then we had to move to Mango. I used to pass these people who were selling cassava and kabalagala. Yes. So we got home and we're like, but we can do this. We were kids. We were very young. But one time we decided to make kabalagala and decided to go sell them outside the gate.
Entrepreneurship.
So my mom, but my mom found us and she's like, you're so disappointing. And my dad's like, no, that's entrepreneurship. They should continue doing it. Of course, we ate all the kabalagalas. We got one client who bought. We were excited, but we made them for ourselves and tried to test the concept if people would buy from us. So we got about a couple of clients, but my mom wasn't too happy about that. So we stopped because she's like, what is it that we need? We'll get our pocket money and turn it into that. But of course, quickly things turned. That's around the time the 1980 war came close, and of course it was in Mango. So that is a pretty dark time, for me and my siblings, because I remember one time my dad calling us and he's like, we need to run, and there were bullets flying over. Right. So we were separated for a few hours, which was really scary. But then at least my dad had given my siblings an instruction that all of you need to run to Mango Hospital then. So they went to Namirembe Church. I went with my dad to Mango, but at least they remembered that because we were pretty young. We were very young. So we remembered and they came, so we were reunited. So part of my childhood is that really hard history of Uganda, which I'm sure you never experienced. I remember telling a friend of mine that I know what it feels like to jump on a body, when the bullets are coming. Because you remember if your parents ever told you that Mango was the barracks, it was that where all the ammunition were in the King's Palace then. So we were not very far from that place. So it was pretty much scary. So as we were running with my dad, I remember we'd fall down when they're shooting. Then we'd get up and he would ask us and he'd say, check if you've got all your parts. So you're a child and you're like, oh. So it is a history. If you talk to anyone who's my age, in our early 40s, they'll tell you that it's a history we do not want Uganda to go back to. And also talking to the Ugandans here in Zimbabwe, because that's the reason they left. To try and look out for opportunities. A lot of them moved to South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Zambia because they were opening up for Black talent, African Black talent. So we understand each other because when we are talking, we kind of understand each other because we lived it as children, they lived it as young adults who are moving into their professional careers. So that's part of my childhood. It was interesting though, because
Wow.
we hardly had electricity because of the bombings. We hardly had water, so we had to look for water sources nearby. And as a child, it's hard, but it was also fun. We didn't see the pain that
I can imagine.
From the comfort to getting used to that. And it actually reminded me this question when you asked me that my understanding of like what happened in northern Uganda, I completely understand when they would say that children had makeshift homes. So the one thing the war acknowledged is if you find a child walking to school, you don't do anything. So my parents would send us to school. And this time, of course, we had moved from Golobi. For us, we're living in Mengo. Is walking that journey from Mengo to Nakasero,
That's a long stretch.
It is a long, but we didn't feel it. Like we were not allowed to pick a lift from anyone. Of course, my dad wouldn't drive because you've seen a bit of our history. So it was always a faith project that the kids are going to make it and they're going to make it back, especially during that period. But we managed somehow. I think it gave us a certain level of resilience. At least we walked, me, my brother, and my sister, because the rest were in upper school and they were in boarding school, so they didn't have to experience that. But it was tough. But when I look back, there was so much joy. I don't remember like the hardships, but I remember the joy and celebrating the president now coming in, because for us was the end of the war, and we're like, we can have peace, So that's my childhood, and interesting time.
I think you should write a book. You should write a book and share some of these things, because hearing this from from someone who really lived it, someone who's not my parent. Sometimes our parents tell us stories and we're like, didn't you add a little bit of salt in there? But hearing it from someone else, I totally understand. And for you, the perspective is actually you are in Kampala, as opposed to my parents. My parents were up country, so their realities were a little bit different from yours, who was literally in the middle of the boiling pot.
Yes.
So would you say that some of these things are, your childhood is what, pushed you into becoming a lawyer and human rights activist?
Yes,
a bit.
A bit. And I'll probably talk about our education system, how it kind of pushes you into certain boxes. Yes, my mom, my sisters say, because my dad is late now, they say that they saw the lawyer in me because I was always argumentative and I always looked out for justice as my entry point in everything that I did. But there's a time, and this is a story I probably need to share. My mom, having been she was in government, she was a technocrat, but of course, as you go higher, then they place you in the Central Intelligence Services so that you can serve the president's office, because she then worked for the president's office, not a president, but the office itself.
Yes.
So she then worked under different presidents, of course, Obote, and after Idi Amin, that's when she says, I'm done, because with Idi Amin, the fall of Idi Amin, she then had to be sent to prison, and she had just given birth to me, because it's a tactic, I'm sure, that is used to make sure that you're going to be committed to the next presidential office. So one of my aunties said, oh, we know why you became a lawyer, because when your mom went to prison, that instilled something in you, because they thought she went with me when I was a baby, but she didn't. She opted for me to stay with my auntie and my dad. Then when she came back, of course, I could stay. So I think there's moments that align, that mean that you're going to get into a particular profession. Yeah. So I guess for me, looking back, that's where my angle of justice came from, and then the love of law. So yes, a lot of the moments in Uganda also influence a lot of who I have become and who I want to be, and the service that I would like to give out there, which is really being a human rights lawyer, and now really moved into very specialized aspect of women, really focusing on women. And for me, that relationship of women and land, I learned it from my grandmother. So each time I actually say my passion for land comes from how I saw my grandmother navigating that. So seeing women just being removed from land because there's potential for diamonds, potential for gold or oil. So that's where for me that came from. But I always thought I was going to be an engineer because my dad was one. And because I'd come from a school and one school into another, because for my high school, I went to Nabingo. So because Nabingo, I hadn't studied there for my O-levels. Nabingo is a very art school. So they want to know that if you're going to do sciences, that they've known your body of work before, so that they know they are feeding you into the right. So I was given Meg, like math, economics, and geography, which I didn't like geography for the love of me. So I changed everything, and I thought, well, if I do math, English, and geography, I can't become an engineer. So I might as well get into the arts terrain. I loved art though, fine art. So it was my fourth subject.
Make art. Okay.
Yeah. So I didn't do make art. I ended up changing to history, economics, and literature, then art. So that's because that was the other option, direct route to a legal career. So I thought, well, I love law-based movies, so I might as well try it out. So the movie and the reality are different, but of course, that's how I ended up in law, which I love dearly, because then the justice angle of my life is filled by that.
Right. That is quite interesting, becoming who you are by connecting the dots from your past. And, you're talking about your grandmother. And, you also talked about your father's family, some of them having remained abroad. So currently you are in Zimbabwe. Is this a family thing, or families, you guys feel comfortable to up and leave and go and become comfortable somewhere else? How did you end up in Zimbabwe? And how long have you lived there?
So I've lived in Zimbabwe for 15 years now. I came on a fellowship. It was the Fred Skopset Fellowship. It's funded by the Norwegian government. So this particular fellowship, so they used to send Africans to Europe, to Norway. So people would come back and they say contexts. When you juxtapose the context, you're far removed. So if you're going to Norway, it's like you're a fish out of water. Then when you come back, you're again a fish out of water, because you're telling people these crazy ideas that everyone's like, okay, go back if you think Uganda is not a great place. So then they opened up an opportunity for African countries to exchange. And for me, there was colleagues who were the pioneers of that. There was a South African, a Zimbabwean, and a Zambian. And each time they would tell me about their context. I loved South Africa because my auntie is South African now. She moved there. We are nomads, so that's why it's easy. And my uncle in Botswana. So when I spoke to one of my Zimbabwean colleagues, I was shocked, because the first time I met all of them, their first thing is like, I'm going to be the future president of South Africa. I'm going to be the future president of Zambia. So I'm like, who are these people? The level of confidence. Right. So when my friend told me that, Connie, you love human rights, the best country to go to, because I had an option to choose between South Africa, Zimbabwe, or Zambia. And he told me, come to Zimbabwe, because you will see the actual testing of human rights within the legal arena, within the legal field, the level of litigation that was happening there, or even just the education around rights that was happening in that time and place. So for me, that pitch resonated with me, because South Africa was just going to be an experience. And, growing up, because my dad always made us watch like the whole rise of ANC, Nelson Mandela. So we followed it a lot. And the Soweto uprisings. So that was hard, but in terms of work, Zimbabwe like resonated with me. And my auntie was married to a Zimbabwean, the one who then moved down to South Africa. So I guess it felt like home and place. So I chose Zimbabwe, and that's how I came here actually.
Wow.
Knew nothing much about Zimbabwe apart from my auntie and the understanding that she left then to go and teach in the Bantustans before South Africa had gotten its independence. Yeah, I found myself here, a fish out of water again. Because, you come with this, when you're in Uganda, we come with this thinking that we are all Africans. But when you go and move from place, you then realize that there are nuances, there's strong nuances about the country. And I remember, now it doesn't frustrate me, but the first time Zimbabweans would ask me, where are you from? How is Nigeria? Actually, they didn't ask me, where are you from? They would ask me, how is Nigeria? And I'm like,
I'm not Nigerian.
I've just told you I'm Ugandan and you say Nigeria or Ghana. And I understand maybe where they were coming from, because a lot of their exposure, Nigerians have made a lot of movies.
Yeah.
So East, we are a bit the quieter side of the continent. Not as much, but I think for the Southern
I think
Africans.
we are.
So everyone's like Ghanaian, Nigerian. So with my cousin, because she also moved here, we used to get so offended. We're like, why don't you know Uganda? There's a part of East Africa that you should know. But just playing forward, when I went to the US, and I realized that again, Nigeria has taken place.
Yes.
Like everyone either sees you through the eyes of South Africa or Nigeria. So
and
they'll ask
to
you
some extent, Kenya, because Kenyan tourism image is really big. Yeah.
So, and if you'd say stuff, you're like, so you said you're Kenyan? I'm like, but I just said I'm Ugandan. Like, really, are we off the radar that you don't know the country? So for me, that actually taught me that we need, as Uganda, we are taking a lot of our place. I won't lie to you, like, if you think about the people who are doing amazing, like the head of World Health Organization here is Ugandan. The head of FDA is Ugandan. The head of UNAIDS is Ugandan. The head of UN Women is Ugandan. So I think, I don't know, maybe we don't take a lot of space. I don't like saying that word, but we need to lift the flag high. Lift it high.
To put a stamp and seal that I am Ugandan and I am here.
And I'm here. Like, the country contributed a lot for you to move. So for me, that is been my experience, and always trying to remind people and showing them the map that you see this is Uganda. But I think also Zimbabwe has opened up a little bit more because of the challenges it's experiencing. So you find that people are now curious about other countries. And the possibility of what it could be to move into another country, close to home, close to culture, accessibility. So they're opening up a little bit more about that. So, and also Kenya has done a good job of really profiling, because you talk about Kenya, immediately you see that in the light, in Uganda in the light.
Somewhere, we're still in the shadow, somewhere coming up.
I wouldn't want to say that. I think we are coming up. We are coming up a lot. People are now starting to recognize a lot of Uganda. And Uganda is coming up as one of the, like, an entrepreneur country. And I won't lie to you, like, each time I go home, I'm so jealous. I'm like, what? Made in Uganda? Because imagine Zimbabwe was there and it's kind of lost that because of the challenges it has faced. A lot of product that we see is South African. So for me, it gives me so much pride to walk into a supermarket and it's no longer just made in Kenya. It's made in Uganda, you know?
Yes.
So and seeing the product sometimes coming onto the markets this side.
Also the quality changing, people
Yes.
having more, you have a certain kind of respect for the quality as opposed to back in the day, you'd be like, it's Ugandan. Don't you have another product? But now I think people are taking the whole quality thing more seriously. And
Yes.
you also mentioned something about them not knowing about East Africa. Yet for us, I think our education system in Uganda is such that you will learn a lot about West Africa. You learn a lot about Southern Africa. So I don't know, is it because we're not really in the middle of Africa, but there's this whole northern part and this whole southern part that we kind of have a taste of each of them. So it's quite surprising for me to hear that Zimbabweans don't know much about Uganda, yet we know something. At least, ask any Ugandan, at least they know a thing or two about Zimbabwe, and they know it is different from Zambia, right? So I'd like to ask you, before you moved to Zimbabwe, what are some, I don't know, preconceived ideas, things in the media, things you heard from relatives, because the last time I spoke to the Kenyan lady, she said that their perspective of Uganda is that many Ugandan women were moving to Kenya as housemaids. I don't know. I don't know if there was any other sort of ridiculous things you had about Zimbabwe before you moved there.
Okay. Before I address that, I actually want to say it's not all Zimbabweans who don't know about Uganda, but of course, like a majority people that I would meet didn't have that level of depth. But there are people I would meet and immediately they would point me. They were like, "You're Ugandan. I've been to Uganda," and that gives you a lot of pride. I'm not too sure if East African history was or is a big part of the curriculum. I've not looked into that, but I think if it isn't, it's important that African history is like in every African country that we first learn about each other first, before we learn about England, before we learn about America.
The French Revolution.
Exactly. So for me, that's one thing, the education system, and this is a message to all African countries, that we then get to know about each other. And that is the way we will develop, open up trade routes and know what we are good at and exchange what we're good at. We come from a place of strength. So what were the preconceived ideas? So I was lucky that when I was going for the exchange program, they put you through a training. So they put you through. So I was with the person who was going to exchange with me. He was Zimbabwean, he was coming to Uganda. So we sat down and compared notes. But they're not even preconceived ideas. And I think it was naivety. I assumed that if I landed into Zimbabwe, I wouldn't have problems. Like that was the naive part of me. And so maybe the other preconceived ideas were I think because my dad spent a lot teaching us about countries, because I knew about the late President Robert Mugabe through my dad. So I knew Zimbabwe. I knew like we used to get a lot of product from Zimbabwe, actually. Like they used to make the best butter. I remember my dad coming with like the best cotton and it was made in Zimbabwe. And I knew about them. So, and a lot of part of my family, like my brother's wife's mom had visited Zimbabwe. So I went, sat down with her and she was telling me how it was this beautiful country that had trams and had everything. So I had that image of Zimbabwe, though in the news, you were reading about the land issues that were happening, the taking of farms from Zimbabwe. So for me, that was a bit of my fear, but again, I thought it wouldn't like affect me. So I didn't really have these preconceived ideas because our interaction with Southern Africa comes from the angle of South Africa. If you remember, before we think of Southern Africa, we think South Africa.
The country.
And then everyone else yes, then you start moving up. So he's my brother-in-law now, but he gave me a decent picture and I did the same for him where I just walked him through Uganda. He was lucky to visit. So I didn't necessarily have those preconceived ideas. And I think it helped me. It helped me a lot to be pleasantly surprised when I landed on the continent, on the piece of rock that is on the continent.
Piece of rock. So you said you thought you wouldn't have any troubles when you landed. Was it because perhaps when you found yourself that you found that the cultures are totally different, or that you found that maybe you were treated differently because you are another African, an outsider? What was your experience like during that time? Because I'd also imagine, if I've never been to another African country, now I know a little bit better, but I would imagine, we're all dark skinned, we are all, it should just be sweet. I'm just moving around very comfortably. Perhaps language might be a bit different, but it should be easy. What was your experience?
So I'll start from the legal movement, the proper legal movement. So my colleague didn't even tell me anything that I needed to comply with. He just said, bring your certificates, bring your whatever, and get into Zimbabwe. I was coming on a fellowship, but it's considered a job, And there I was, young, naive. I go and sign. I've come to work. I'm a human rights lawyer. This is Zimbabwe we're talking about then. You say human rights, that was like a taboo then.
Yeah.
So the immigration officer looked at me and he's like, oh my goodness, you remind me of my daughter. He's like, I'm going to give you 60 days, which I shouldn't have, but you need to get into when you get into the country, when they allow you on the border point, to get in, go to immigration and have this stamped and start processing your work permit. Wow. So I'm like, what? So I get to the office, meet all my colleagues, and they're like, what did you just say? You told them you're a human rights lawyer? I'm like, yeah, I'll do the same thing.
That's what I do.
Yeah. So they're like, you're so lucky he let you in. Because what's strange is my uncle was a journalist. He's a journalist. He was coming into Zimbabwe to cover something for the BBC. And I'm walking in, I'm seeing him being turned back by two officers. So we're looking at each other and I'm like, what's going on? So he arrives. The good thing is I'd given them the number of the office. So everyone at home is calling frantically because they're thinking, he's been deported. How did you get in? Yet you both probably,
in the same kind of,
Yes. So he's calling everyone and saying, check on Connie. We don't know if she's been taken in for the wrong reasons, because now I don't have an eye on her. Meanwhile, I'm okay, because when I met my colleagues, they're fine. They took me through the process. They took me to where I was going to stay because they had organized housing for me, because part of the fellowship required that there was a good base for someone to settle and land and teach us the culture to navigate where we're going to be. And my colleague who was exchanging with me, luckily enough, was going to be there for about an extra week. So he helped me navigate that. But then what was difficult is a couple of months in, I'm told you have to go to immigration. So I go to immigration.
How long was the fellowship supposed to last?
1 year. It was a 1 year fellowship.
Wow.
So a few months in, I'm told you need to go to immigration. So I go to immigration and they're like, how are you here? And immigration, I know everywhere in the world, even in Uganda, I don't want to justify, they were so aggressive. So I'm thinking, what is wrong? Because I'd filed my papers as human rights lawyer. And of course, that was, I guess, the problem. And
yes.
Already, like, you need to pay in US dollars. So already you're feeling like, I'm not wanted in this place. I'm only here for a year. I'm not doing anything wrong. Then I get a notice that you've got a couple of days to leave. Or you're going to be detained. So I'm thinking, I'm not a criminal. What have I done? So it's frustrating. So the office were really helpful. They were involved in the process. And then I go to one of the meetings, because we had to meet like someone in foreign affairs, and it's going on about, we've got people who just come here illegally and But like, this person is on a fellowship.
Right.
So they're speaking in Shona, but I could hear, and maybe they thought we would be different. So he's talking and talking and saying, you wait and see them. So he's embarrassed when my boss says, that's the young lady. What do you think? She's like, oh, okay, I thought she was Zimbabwean. And, we're not different from each other. So, so that's when it's taken to court to challenge the whole deportation. So for me, that was my entry into country, into Zimbabwe. So it was heartbreaking to go through that and try to justify my place of being here on the fellowship. But along the way, then things eased up, and it didn't end up becoming this whole big case. It ended up being really just understanding, what is she doing? Okay, can she do something else that is not court work? And of course I couldn't, because I needed to do my conversions, and the officer I was working for then we're explaining that this is a fellowship we have as Zimbabwean. Then it was really helpful that there was like a diplomatic notes that were exchanged from the foreign office, but also the case helped a lot, where they also explained that we have a Zimbabwean here who we gave stay for the whole year, and it would only be fair because these are youngsters who want to expand their knowledge in the field, so it would be great. So that was my entry. Very different from everyone else.
So you were you were your own first case under human rights.
That was my very own first case. But then from there, everything was smooth sailing. Because to be honest, when you get into a place where no one will know that you're Kenyan or you're Ugandan, apart from when we open our mouth and your accent places you, we are not any different. So it made me question a lot, because all these laws were put in place, and this is also coming from my work, by the colonizer, really.
Yes,
so we were divided into little pieces of rock, and I like how you say we're all in one rock, really. So into these little pieces of rock, and we became afraid of each other, and we blocked each other from that. And I do understand the importance of immigration. There are people who come and flood a country when it doesn't have the jobs, but it's also very important to see when someone is going to come and add value.
Yes.
Yeah, from a different perspective. And diversity for me, like you spoke about, it is very important for everyone. Just understanding, just moving away from home and coming into a different country opens your mind. It blows you away to see what's possible. Like for me, when I landed here, I saw what's possible. So many beautiful things about Zimbabwe, from how they used to market, how they used to package, they had this finesse about everything, which now South Africa is the one exporting that to the rest of the world. But Zimbabwe had that. So for me sitting there, I'm like, whoa, you could tell the rest of the world, because the rest of the world knew then, but this could be sold, because then Uganda, we were coming into ourselves. Just imagine, all we needed was a couple of Zimbabweans coming and saying, you could just package this product this way. And then it's all over the world, because they used to export a lot to the UK and Europe. So they had that finesse to everything. So for me, it opened up my eyes around that, to say, can we be more open and move around the continent and appreciate which skill each one of us brings? Like Uganda is very entrepreneur, so that could be our selling point to the rest of the world. Ideas generation, and it catches like fire in Uganda. True. So yeah, that was my entry. And apart from that, a few shocking things, like I said earlier, was people not knowing exactly when you say Ghana, like Uganda, it's Ghana, like no, Ghana. So I'm like, okay, Ghana it will be. But that's because the first lady who died before Grace Mugabe, the one everyone knows, was a Ghanaian. So of course that's resonance, like, oh, Uganda, Ghana. So I later understood that. And then also, I think, the shock was always coming from, we didn't know Uganda had this. There's always the not knowing.
Mm-hmm.
But culturally,
Mm-hmm.
because I think then I wasn't yet married, because then I married a Zimbabwean. I saw a different, like the first thing you see about Zimbabwe is the culture you see, like the group culture, then the culture you see when you've stayed longer. I'm sure I don't know if it happens in Japan. So
it happens to everyone.
then you see the culture. So that other culture is the one that then you're like, okay. And then you look beyond that, and you find good friends, you find amazing people who just continue blowing your mind. And then maybe one thing that I experienced, in Uganda, when we go in meetings, but maybe we do it unconsciously and we don't realize, is we don't speak a lot of our indigenous language in the office, So one time I went for a meeting and this woman rattled off and she was presenting everything in Shona. So I put up my hand and I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't understand. And this was like 2 weeks in, they sent me to a meeting. So she turns, looks at me and says, find someone to translate for you.
Hey.
Wow. That like really, really, I got up and I said, I'm sorry, I would like to contribute, but because I can't find place or language or something that I can communicate with at the present moment, I have to leave. So everyone else was concerned. She wasn't. Everyone else was concerned. They're like, no, that's not how we respond. That's not how we receive our guests. But she was determined, her whole presentation. So I left and I went and told my boss that I couldn't stay in the meeting because I didn't have anything to report back.
Yeah.
Because then I was bothering someone else. What did she say? So that meant is what did she say? What did she say? So I left. So that's also one thing that I found a little disturbing, because we go back and beyond if we notice that someone is not from the country.
Yes.
We literally make everyone know that, wait a minute. But that's maybe us experiencing ourselves in our country. You never know that that's how other people then experience.
That is also
Uganda,
true.
because I also had a friend Zimbabwean who went to Uganda and she did not have a great time. she complained about us, so I completely understand, because you will meet people who are exposed,
quite different.
They want to help you just like you do in Uganda. So I wouldn't want to say that they would not experience it, because I know a friend also from Kenya who said, Connie, I had such a hard time to just get my immigration papers. And that was shocking, because I'm like,
it's just across the border.
Yes, but I also know Ugandans who go to Kenya and experience exactly that. So it makes a lot of sense, and I don't hold that back, because it's not that, it's a legacy that was left to us, where we became, through our legal system, made it difficult to welcome
allies.
Open us up. Yes, welcome allies and fellow. We're sharing the same rock, for crying out loud.
We're sharing the same rock, so I don't even understand why we even have visas. I need a visa to go to some West African countries, and it's just crazy. But anyway, nonetheless, so you've been in Zimbabwe 15 years, and you said along the way you got married, but your work life, after the fellowship, after the 1 year, did you come back to Uganda, or you somehow just continued? And is that the time perhaps you also met your husband? So it's just been a continuous 15 years, or somehow you got back to Uganda, and then how did you go back?